today. Dr. Artur Preus is here with us to guide us through a journey of enterprise architecture and specifically on business capabilities related to enterprise architecture. Artur, what a pleasure to have you here with us. For those of you who do not know Dr. Artur Preus, he currently leads business. He's the lead business architect at Deutsche Bank, responsible for the bank's financial crime business architecture model. He is a member of the Business Architecture Guild and its finance industry working group. Artur's professional experience includes establishing and executing business architecture discipline and operating models in financial and telecommunications organizations, including deployments into more than 40 markets simultaneously. He is especially passionate about client-centric and value-driven architecture and its impact on organizational process, data, and technology critical elements. Dr. Artur, it's a real pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for taking the time to sharing your expertise with our global audience today.
Thank you, Joseph, for a very nice introduction indeed. Hello, everyone. I hope you are all safe. This week here in the UK, we have a less typical British weather, so to speak. It's around 0 degrees outside and a little bit of snow dust on the street. So yeah, quite different than the usual winter. Let me start with saying how grateful I am to be able to talk to you about something fundamental to what organizations around the world do and to what most of them are trying to constantly make better, as well as about something important to what enterprise architecture obviously helps those organizations with. It is also something I have personally seen as indeed producing business benefits and helping to achieve strategic objectives. Before we will talk about the key subject of this presentation, let me add a few words to what Jose had already said about myself. My professional experience includes, as we said, building, establishing, and implementing enterprise architecture disciplines and models in various industries, including telecommunication and finance. Throughout more than 20 years of doing so, I was able to observe how the approach to architecture and to how it supports its stakeholders and consumers has massively evolved. One of the most interesting things to observe was how capabilities have become fundamental to any architecture considerations, and learn how their usage can be constantly refined and improved in order to obtain a maximum possible value from them. And with this is what we are going to talk about today also. The key points we're going to look at and discuss during the next 25 minutes include a quick but important reminder of what capabilities are and what purpose they serve, how capabilities can be used to describe the current state and also help to determine the future state of an organization, and last but not least, how capabilities can or should be used to drive a transformation, business transformation. I hope that by the end of this presentation, you'll be able to discern and see why, although very often called fundamental, or maybe or perhaps precisely because of that, capabilities are valuable elements of, or should be considered as valuable elements of enterprise architecture. To set the proper scene, or common ground, we should say, for the remaining part of our presentation, let me start with basics first. We are going to discuss what capability is. This is to make sure that we are all on the same page and understand in the same way things we're going to talk about a lot today. One of the most straightforward but also very accurate definition which describes what business capability is the definition proposed by Business Architecture Guild. According to it, capability defines what a business does. This definition constitutes an important principle. Capability does not explain where, why, or how something is being done. only what is done. It is important because that principle introduces some important implications for what capabilities are and what they are not, and also how they should be considered. For example, capability is not a process, because the process identifies how capability is being performed. Also, capability is not an organizational unit, as organization unit identifies part that owns process, that capability at the end of the day requires to be able to operate. Rather than those or such things that obviously are still closely linked to capability, capability itself is a particular ability or capacity that an organization may have to or need to possess in order to be able to achieve a specific purpose or produce required business outcomes. At a high level, for example, this would include a car manufacturer's ability to produce cars, a parcel services ability to perform logistics, and any sorts of company's ability to collect feedback from its customers. The important and interesting fact, which we'll be talking about on multiple occasions today during this next 20 minutes, is that capabilities are established to produce business or deliver business outcomes. Viewing organization as a set of capabilities they need in order to operate opens the door to visualize organizational ecosystems in a wide variety of ways, but what's important, without getting confused by too many details. Business capability frameworks' key objective at its core is to present an integrated and comprehensive set of capabilities. It's much like an architectural blueprint, which seeks to illustrate what a construction may look like. The same capability framework's objective is to depict what an organization does or will be doing if we talk about target state of those capabilities. By sort of amalgamating different but required capabilities and turning them into a systematic model, organizations can provide an overarching view of what is ultimately important for them to do in order to, again, achieve their strategic objectives. The specific benefits we can imagine resulting from having defined and established capability framework include, for example, the fact that it provides a common language which can be used to discuss issues, strategies, and plans, both within the business, but also between the business part of any organization and IT or other part of that organization. It helps, for example, problem resolutions to be achieved in less time and with less confusion. And in fighting, there is some very often or sometimes attributed to misunderstandings that arise when organizations try to handle especially problems that cross different business units. Secondly, capabilities are all organizationally neutral, because capabilities describe what an organization does. They are not impacted by organizational changes. And because of that, capabilities are perfect tools for a long-term definition of what we do. Well, how we do these things may be changing, may be evolving. This is, by the way, one of the most important characteristics of capabilities too. They are stable, and as fundamental components, they change rarely. And the last point, capabilities also help to focus on improvements or improvement opportunities. If supplemented, for example, with additional data on the current performance level, as well as the current gaps and deficiencies, capabilities can help to prioritize organizational process, system, or data changes and improvement efforts. This is, by the way, something we are going to talk about a little bit more in this part. And we will start with the capability maturity. The maturity approach recognizes 4 or 5 levels of capability development. It starts with the lowest initial level, usually when a capability is defined and established. At that point, such capability has significant deficiencies in organizational, may have significant deficiencies either in organizational structure, access to required resources, the way how processes are conducted, and available technology and data. And all these make such capabilities very chaotic and very often focus on figure out how they should operate, while in the same time, obviously, they're trying to meet at least some stakeholders' requirements or expectations. It is obvious that at this stage, capabilities should not stay too long and should be trying to climb up to the next level or levels of maturity as soon as possible. The initial, along with repeatable maturity levels, should thus be considered as temporary states rather than permanent, obviously, as kind of steps towards more mature levels of the development. The entire concept of the capability maturity serves the purpose of understanding when its life cycle capability is. And by using the same definitions and rating approach across all different capabilities that can exist in organization to use this approach to determine which one out of all those capabilities may require special attention. And this is when we are going to talk more about the next important element of capabilities, as being the cornerstone of enterprise architecture. In order to survive and make profits, organizations have to evolve and adjust to the changing political and economic landscapes. The same, as we said, is required from capabilities. Capability maturity model, as we said, helps to understand at what maturity level an organization is at any particular point of time. It also provides an understanding of what is required to move its maturity, capability maturity to the next level. How, though, it can be determined at what particular maturity level an organization currently is. This is where so-called maturity criteria are coming handy. They provide a consistent way of measuring current maturity level, and if used consistently whenever a measurement, such measurement is taking place, for example, on a quarterly or annual basis, they allow to compare previous results and the current ones in order to determine and assess if any progress has been made. The common theme used to assess capability maturity levels are operating model components. So we're talking about organizational structure, we talk about people, process, data, and technology components or criteria. Because they are universal and every organization has them, so it should be easy to develop, establish, and then use those criteria in order to assess the maturity level for all capabilities against exactly the same assessment criteria. It does not mean, though, that the organizations cannot or should not try to use assessment criteria more aligned to their specific needs or to what they do. The point, though, is, especially because the assessment results can be used not only to understand capabilities, current development state, but also to see how different capabilities across the whole organization compare with each other. That the important is that the maturity criteria could be or should be universal rather than unique. In summary, the key purpose of capability maturity assessment is to establish how developed or mature capabilities are. The assessment results then provide the precious information on what needs to change in organizational, again, structure, processes, technology, or data, so that capabilities could achieve better results or could move to the next level of the development and maturity. And with this, we are going to move on to the next interesting topic. Capabilities are, as we said earlier, developed and established to help an organization understand what it does, and using a set of common assessment criteria to see at what level of their development's capabilities are. And as a result of this principle, it's easy to imagine that capability owners need to understand how an organization's strategy and its strategic objectives should get transposed and embedded into their capability-specific objectives, and ultimately considered, obviously, while applying capability development. This is where capability maturity assessment, a concept we have just talked about, can now be enriched with, or should be enriched with, additional piece of assessment criteria in order to support understanding of how changing capability operating model can or should support capability and organizational strategy. We are talking about linking capability business outcomes or objectives with capability operating model, and making both parts of the same maturity assessment process. We have previously said that the capability maturity assessment operating model criteria describe what capability needs to be able to do, and that it allows to determine what operating model components are required and at what stage to determine where the capability is today, and what needs to change in order to move that capability maturity level closer to the target state. The business outcomes, on the other hand, show what business value capability should be able to deliver, assuming that all, obviously, operating model requirements or criteria are delivered and established as required. In other words, business outcomes establish a set of help establish a set of success criteria, if you like, that can be used to assess if capability operating model helps to deliver expected business results, but also to see and decide if operating model changes required to progress to the next level of or levels of maturity can justify required investments. Those both elements, capability operating model requirements and business outcomes linked to them, obviously, when put together, provide executives and transformation teams with a holistic understanding of not only what problems they might be facing and what changes might be required, but also why, but by providing answers to questions such as, for example, what is the value that can be achieved at the end of the day when all changes required to move up to the next maturity level will get delivered, and perhaps what particular capability should go through required changes first, where we should invest our money, in what particular capability, as perhaps this capability has the biggest, or set of capabilities have the biggest impact on our strategic objectives. With this, now we are coming to our considerations to the point where it all kind of comes together, a very important, fundamental, so to speak, element of enterprise architecture. As perhaps we all know, at its core, enterprise architecture aims to establish a conceptual blueprint that defines the organization structure and operations. The intent of enterprise architecture is to determine how an organization can effectively achieve its core and future objectives. Something, by the way, what we talked about today on multiple occasions is also a primary objective of capability model and capability maturity assessment. The key difference is that enterprise architecture supports organizations in understanding how their business models work from a much wider perspective, and includes elements like governance, technology, and data, perhaps components. And because of this, enterprise architecture has an important kind of unifying and coordinating role. It helps sort of bridge that gap between business part of the organization, where capabilities belong to and start from, with its strategy, strategic objectives, and stakeholders' value, and put this together with IT and data functions. And as we have already said, knowledge of capability current state obviously helps to, or should help to, identify and determine gaps that are important from the business perspective, and as a result, help to make better informed decisions on how to organize, how to structure the whole organization, and how to set the interactions between its different capabilities to make it more effective, at least from the business, or importantly, obviously, from the business perspective. This then, if you think about what capabilities can provide with them, what we've just described, can be used in order to determine what technology might be required from the future perspective, and how data model and data sources can support capabilities, or should support capabilities, in achieving their strategic objectives. And now, having this in mind, it seems fair to conclude that capabilities provide a business-oriented start point or platform for discussions around strategic changes, drive those conversations, and ultimately see what particular investments, either in technology or data and data, can be required that should be considered. So as results, just to summarize these thoughts on enterprise architecture and capabilities, we should say that capabilities provide a structured platform, as we said, helping to ensure the most effective investments, and doing so by putting this attention with its maturity assessment, incorporating operating model criteria and business outcomes on essential aspects that impact organizations' strategic objectives. They help, so to speak, to cut through the surrounding noise of many different things that happen around the organization, and focus on on those parts of an organization that really matters. There is one additional important enterprise architecture artifact that has become very popular in recent years, and also proved to be very helpful in designing target operating models, which is, for that reason, worth to mention before we'll conclude. We obviously are talking about value streams. A value stream is a set of actions that need to take place in order to provide value to its stakeholders, be it internal service consumers or external customers. Value stream helps to determine and show how that value expected or requested by either internal or external stakeholder should be produced from the initial requests through to the realization of value by its requester. Value streams need capabilities to be able to produce and deliver expected value. It could be said that capabilities help to visualize an organization at rest. It's kind of static view of what our organization does. Value streams, on the other hand, decompose this organization into high-level processes and allow to visualize that organization in sort of motion. Knowing what capabilities are required to execute value streams, and putting that knowledge together with what we know about, for example, capability maturity assessment results, gaps, problems, current state, potential business outcomes that should be achieved or could be achieved if moved from one level maturity to the next one. All this knowledge definitely helps to see the strongest points and the weakest points in the entire value journey. It then helps to analyze and understand why the stakeholders might not be happy with what they get at the end of value stream and what they pay for. Again, similarly to what we said about enterprise architecture, combining value streams concept with capability framework allows for much better informed and much more focused, we should say, decisions on the organizational process, technology, data, change plans, and obviously transformation investments. And with this, we have come to the last point of this presentation, and we are going to summarize and highlight the key aspects of what we have discussed today. First thing, and really and obviously fundamental to all the things which we discussed today, capabilities. Capabilities help to recognize and understand what an organization does and what abilities it needs to acquire in order to be able to operate. Is a high-level representation, in other words, describing what any particular organization is able, should be able, or aim to be able to do in order to deliver strategic and operational objectives. The second thing, which is closely linked to capability model or capabilities themselves, is capability maturity assessment framework, which we talked about. That framework is set up and employs capabilities themselves, but also maturity operating model criteria, and ideally also business outcomes added into that picture to determine if capabilities are as productive and efficient as required and possible for them, and what needs to happen or change in order for capabilities to operate more efficiently. So in other words, they could deliver those required strategic objectives. Putting together these two elements, operating model criteria and business outcomes, and linking them together in order to understand what particular business outcomes can be achieved depending on what maturity level capability is at any point of time, which obviously translates into operating model criteria. Those four basic operating model criteria which we mentioned helps executives and transformation teams to understand where we are now, how much of the business value we can deliver, and also what would need to happen, what would need to change in the way how capability operates in order to be for that capability and ultimately the entire value stream to deliver better, more effective value at the end of the day. And the last point which we discussed, obviously, and finally, capabilities are also fundamental to enterprise architecture considerations because they help to understand what is the current state of that organization and also help to design and see what the future target business requirements should be established in order to meet perhaps more strategic objectives. And this knowledge then can be used obviously to determine things like, as we said, technology, data, or other particular elements which might be required in order to support that business strategy. There are also other important use cases for capability we didn't have time to talk about. For example, capabilities could be used, even should be used, to drive performance reporting, or in order to establish internal service agreements between different capabilities or parts of an organization, in order to ensure that all those capabilities they equally and efficiently support value streams and can help and contribute into delivering the ultimate value for value stream stakeholders. All these additional elements which I've just mentioned provide just another proof, in addition to what we have discussed already today, that capabilities are truly the cornerstone of enterprise architecture and should be used by organizations to determine and arrange how they operate and also design the future state, how they would like to be operating going forward. And with this, I'd like to thank you all for your attention. Again, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, and just looking forward to hearing and answer some questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Preus. A terrific presentation. We appreciate the insights from someone who has been doing it at scale for quite some time. So great insights. We have lots of questions, and we have quite a bit of time. We have a bit more time than normal here for questions. So take advantage of it. We have Dr. Preus here with us, and a unique opportunity to dive deeper into these topics. So I'll set the stage for the broader audience here on the topic that you're talking about. And what I have here just behind me, this topic of digital transformation, very exciting. But the reality is that most digital transformations fail. And if you look at the most recent reports from large consulting companies, they'll talk about 70–80% digital transformations failing to achieve their objectives. And one quote that I really enjoy is that technology is wonderful if it enables the right processes to deliver the right outcomes, but also technology can make stupid happen at the speed of light. So you have to be very intentional about the technologies and the architectures that you use. So going deeper into this topic, which is the alignment of capabilities with business outcomes and technology. The first question that comes, Dr. Preus, is from Marcus Merkel. And Marcus asks, when an organization starts its enterprise architecture journey, how would you propose to set up the first capability map when you're just getting started?
I think this is a very good question, and it's not easy. My experience with establishing a capability framework, building the view of all these capabilities, which usually, because we're not talking about just one capability, that's obvious that any organization requires multiple different capabilities. And to be able to recognize what those capabilities are and clearly distinguish one capability from another, and ultimately establish the whole set of capabilities that are required for an organization to exist and deliver its business or strategic objectives. This is really a difficult thing to do. The way how it's worth to start with, or where from usually that works, should be started, is you need to find out what are distinguishable high-level elements of what your organization do, and try to make a clear set of high-level, as I said, distinguishable elements, which can be clearly separated from other parts of the organization, and define what that part does, who is responsible and own that part. In other words, we talk about obviously capability owners, and ultimately we're talking about also what processes that particular capability will require in order to be able to operate, and ultimately going down to systems and data, what are additional resources, and obviously people as well, what are additional resources that capability will require in order, as I said, to operate. That ultimately should help to create a set of capabilities. As I said, they have to be distinguishable. We are not talking about definitely capabilities can be redundant, for example, shouldn't be repeatable. So if we talk about capabilities and their role and responsibilities within an organization, they have to be clearly responsible for a set of activities and set of responsibilities that cannot belong in the same time to any other capabilities. That helps to distinguish, as I said, capabilities, and clearly define and set the boundaries between different capabilities, and also to describe in what way they are responsible for the outcomes that might be consumed, or should be, perhaps in many occasions, a situation should be consumed by other capabilities, so that ultimately putting together different capabilities, they could deliver that ultimate value, which we talk about when we look at the value streams concept or perspective as well.
And Artur, when you see this in organizations and even at Deutsche Bank, when things are working well, on setting up the structure and and the mapping the capabilities and the value streams and the enterprise architecture, bring it all together. Who is leading this for the company? Is it coming from the operational side of the business? Is it coming from an architect in IT? How do you see this working in the organizations that do it well?
So in order, this is very good question, because in order to keep consistent approach and view of capabilities and make sure that, for example, level of description and the level that capabilities are being looked at is exactly the same. The way how this usually is being done, it can either come up from the business side, business perspective, which usually is too busy to do that. And obviously it's responsible for BAU, so that's usually something what makes the business busy. So the other solution, and usually where that initiative is coming from, and the ultimately responsibility for capability framework or model sits with, is either transformation or strategy and business architecture. Those teams that usually are looking from the more broad perspective at the entire organization, either the entire organization, literally the entire, or some big parts of that organization, they have better knowledge and are better equipped to kind of provide that consulting, overarching view and help and support going to different part of that organization, which ultimately and usually are exactly capabilities themselves, in order to talk to the capability owners, determine what they currently are responsible for, describe the current state, but also there's an important element which I mentioned during when I was talking about capabilities, obviously, which is the fact that you should use or can use capabilities not only to define the current state, but also build the future state. So, and this is something what I mentioned also, the capabilities, even from the future perspective, are potentially, most of them are going to stay the same. But because we are not talking about just set of high-level boxes on a piece of paper, but there is a huge amount of knowledge which sits behind it, like, for example, roles and responsibilities, people, technology, data, which ultimately all these elements should be put into that capability box. And in order to describe how capability is going to operate, there's also elements of touch points with other capabilities. This usually, if you think about that, that comes to the point where either transformation or, as I said, strategic and business architecture have to work together with the business, with capability owners, in order to describe current state, design a capability model or establish that model, and use that model in order to figure out how the future strategic either capability itself or set of capabilities should work and should operate.
Very good. I have questions. There's a theme that has emerged with the questions that I'm looking at here, and has to related to the maturity levels themselves, and from identified to a maturity level of define and then to be optimized. The question is, what should be the maturity level for key business processes? Should they all be optimized?
That's a very good question, because looking at common standards when it comes to capabilities and maturity levels, as you said, the common approach is either to have 4 or 5 different levels. And usually the way how these levels are being defined, they kind of refer to different sort of approaches to operating model and operating model elements, right? So we're talking about organizational structure, people, the usual ones are organizational structure, people, technology, and data. The way how they should be established, as I said, can be adjusted to an organization needs, because there are some common elements talking about the fact that at the lowest level, for example, everything is chaotic. Then you should try to organize yourself, then establish, implement, then you can start or should start to think about how to optimize, for example, your processes, because you've got them defined, you've got them implemented, you've got them described, you understand what your process landscape is, what your technology landscape is, or what's your data landscape is. And now moving on from that usually level 3, which is like a middle level, right? You have a good foundation for moving 1 level or 2 levels up in order to start optimizing, which is usually next level, level 4, up to the point of level 5, which is where you're trying to be almost like a market leader, right? So but that's a good question, and this is where exactly business outcomes are coming into the picture, where by putting these two together, you can start asking question whether achieving or being at level 3 and achieving because that's exactly what level 3 allows you to do, achieving your business outcomes and business result at that level is enough. Or if you like to move to level 4, which potentially would help you to achieve better business results, but it's going to cost you some investments, for example, into your technology, or it's going to cost you some investments into your data. Is it justified? And by looking at business outcomes, that question is even more important when you think about level 5, where you'd like to achieve or become almost like a market leader. Is it worth to do this? And that's a question where an organization has to answer how much you're willing to pay in order to achieve that level 5, because perhaps level 4 might be just enough. But that's exactly
Very
where
good.
Sorry, just one thing. By putting these two things together, it's going to be easier for an organization, either capability or the entire organization, to answer that question, how much it's going to invest into technology, data, and other elements in order to develop them, as opposed to what ultimate business outcomes this is going to achieve, deliver.
Very good, very good. I have a shout out to Lisa Karam here, who's asking a number of different questions. Very engaged. We appreciate that, Lisa. I'm gonna have to pick some of your questions because you have a lot of them, and I think this one summarizes pretty well. Artur, can you tell us a little bit about just your own work and engagement at the bank and applying these principles in the bank environment? There are a lot of people in our audience today who are doing business transformations in banks. As you know, financial sector is going through a lot of changes, and they're curious about what has the journey been for you, practically speaking, implementing these principles in the bank environment.
So I have a pleasure at the moment working with financial crime domain at Deutsche Bank, which is pretty much big, if you can imagine, because it spans across all business lines and different customer or client types as well. And it's quite challenging work. And this is where exactly having capability framework established, which wasn't easy job to do. But once established, it helped massively to make sure that every conversation I'm having across the bank with many different business stakeholders, either on the business side or IT or data side, it helps to, this is one of these benefits which I mentioned when I talk about having capability framework established. It brings conversation down on make sure that conversation which we're having is about exactly the same part of the organization, that we understand what particular function, for example, we talk about, where that function fits into wider and bigger context, because we use capabilities in order also to describe business architecture and show how, at least from high level, when you think about enterprise or business architecture, how from high level perspective capabilities interact between with each other. And that helps to put every conversation about not just that capability and its particular needs, but also the touch points with other capabilities, and also understanding what are potentially common technology, for example, requirements that can exist or should exist for a bigger group of capabilities. That helps kind of steer that conversation and make sure that when people are looking at any particular part of the business I'm currently part of, that we know exactly what we're talking about. We know which part of that business we're talking about. We know how that part of the business has been immersed into wider picture. So it kind of established, as I said on multiple occasions today, established that platform for having conversations, meaningful conversations with multiple different stakeholders on both business and IT and data sides.
Artur, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and practical insights with our global audience today. Being an honor and a pleasure, and grateful that you took the time to be with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much all, and stay safe. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Artur Preus from Deutsche Bank, and sharing his insights on enterprise architecture capability building. Very, very interesting perspectives on how a very large organization looks at enterprise architecture. Some of the other benchmarking that we have been that we have access to also shows that successful digital transformations, to look at the ones that are very successful, are very much a common feature that they have is a very good foundation for understanding process capabilities, process architecture, and of course, the business model structure that he shared with us just now. So if you're a novice, maybe it's a bit difficult to follow some of the depth of these insights, but if you are an experienced practitioner and leader, you know the importance of this foundational work so that your enterprise architecture and technology can align and deliver the value that you'd like to have. So thank you for being here with us. We're gonna wrap up the session now, and we're gonna start up again at the top of the hour with a leader in enterprise architecture from Johnson & Johnson. So don't miss that. Architecture in the product-oriented delivery model. It's a shift from the conversations. We go from a bank to a product company. And Ida Dunayev is the Senior Director of Enterprise Architecture for Johnson & Johnson, and she is going to be sharing with us her perspectives on how enterprise architecture works in an organization that has a product delivery model. So look forward to seeing you at the top of the hour. See you soon.